Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Maekar the First, Maekar the Only, it has to be said. Probably one of the least understood of the Targaryen kings. We know who he is. He's the father of Aegon V, Egg, but also he doesn't seem to do huge amounts. He reigned for a goodly period of time, but at the same time, it was a time of peace. So what we'll try and do, first of all, is I'll explain, as I always do, I'll give an introduction to who he is, where he fits into all of this, and some of the highlights of his life. And then I'm going to be digging into some questions, because this is a fascinating time. We're right in the middle of the Dunk and Egg period here. We're dealing with the Blackfire rebellions. We're within touching distance, both going back in time to the Dance of the Dragons, but also very much in touching distance of the main story that we have, A Song of Ice and Fire. So this is the sort of the hinge period between those two. Okay, so we have, hang on, let me just line up my screen a touch more. We have Maekar. Now, he was born the fourth son of Aegon the Fourth. Now, not Aegon the Fourth, sorry. Let me get my facts straight. He was born the fourth son of Deeren II. Now, if you remember Deeren II from a few weeks ago, this is Deeren the Good. Deeren, the man who finally to unite the Seven Kingdoms, bring dawn into the Seven Kingdoms, and he did it peacefully. And he reigned over can't really call it a peaceful period, but a good period for the Targaryens. There was the Blackfire Rebellion during his time, the first Blackfire Rebellion. But then, sadly, he died. Aerys the First unexpectedly took over in his place. And who we have here is Maekar, who unexpectedly took over from Aerys. Now, this is the key theme that runs through this whole period, is most of these kings did not expect to be kings. Certainly Aegon Egg, who takes over after Maekar, he was known as Aegon the Unlikely. That was how unexpected it was that he became king. He was the fourth son of a fourth son. So Maekar did not grow up thinking that he was going to be king. He was the fourth son, and he grew up in the shadow of his eldest brother, Baelor. Baelor Breakspear was the great king that the Targaryens never had. We meet him in the first Dunk and Egg story, and he seems like a really good guy. Baelor is a bit like him, but he's always kind of described as being a little bit less, little less good at the fighting, a little less wise, a little less charismatic. But he was still fourth in line. There was Aerys, and there was also Rhaegal. So he was not expecting to be king. By the time we get to the first Dunk and Egg story, the tourney at Ashford Meadow, we know of it as the Hedge Knight of the story, but this is remembered to the people of Westeros as the tourney of Ashford Meadow. He is there attending along with quite a lot of the Targaryens, because the Targaryens have now expanded out again. The Dance of the Dragons, there were lots of Targaryens that came back in again, so there were not many Targaryens. By this point, it has expanded out once more. There are lots of Targaryens, and he is there at Ashford Meadow, basically supporting his two sons. He had four sons, and two of them he has basically pushed into entering the lists, entering the tourney. There's Ariel Brightflame, who charismatic but problematic. And then there's also his other son, Deeren the Dreamer. Now, he's known as the Dreamer because he's a dragon dreamer. However, he is not really known as Deeren the Dreamer. He's known as Deeren the Drunken. Because in order to get rid of all of these dreams, he just keeps drinking. And Egg is made his squire for this tourney. So Maekar arrives thinking he's got two sons who are going to be in this tourney. He's wanting to cheer them on, but also he seems to be an incredibly proud father. He wants them to be the best that they could be, and he kind of equates this, it seems, to be martial brilliance. That is what makes somebody wonderful, a good son, and he wants them to be beating their cousins. So he turns up and he finds that actually Deeren has gone missing, along with Aegon, his youngest son, who was supposed to be Deeren's squire. So this is concerning. He goes hunting for them. He's missing from most of the tourney, trying to find them. There are rumours of there being some brigands about. There are possibilities that maybe they just got caught up on the way. The rivers were quite high. There'd been quite a lot of rain. Nobody really knows, but it's a bit concerning. Meanwhile, Ariel, if you've read the story, he does not comport himself particularly well. We're told that he genuinely and generally did when his father was around, but when his father was not there, then he was the epitome of an entitled Targaryen. If you thought, say, Joffrey Baratheon was bad, Ariel was even worse. And during the tourney, basically he starts picking on, in a really quite sinister and again entitled way, Tansel Tutal, as Dunk calls her, a woman, a puppeteer, and Dunk intervenes. He prevents this. Now, in so doing, he struck Ariel. He attacked a prince of the realm. Ariel demands his justice. Maekar just arrives back at this point. He has found Deeren in an inn a few miles away, very drunk. And Deeren, perhaps just trying to cover his back, says, "Yeah, so Egg, who's not here, I think he got abducted by a really tall hedge knight." This appears to be Dunk. So then Ariel comes in and basically swears that Dunk has been up to no good, and Maekar is absolutely on his son's side here. Dunk goes for the trial of the seven, which escalates. This should just have been something which was an amusing oddity. The trial of the seven is actually not very rare. This kind of thing hadn't happened for a long time. Perhaps the last one that happened was all the way back with Maegor the Cruel. We certainly don't hear of any after that. But in that trial, 7 against 7, Baelor Breakspear, the heir, he comes in on the side of Dunk. Maekar comes in on the side of Ariel, his son, and there's a huge battle. And I'll get into I've got questions about this, so I won't get into all of the details of it. But the end result is that Baelor Breakspear dies from wounds afflicted during this trial, almost certainly by Maekar himself, his own brother. Maekar has killed his brother. It was part of doing justice. Nobody seems to sort of blame him immediately, though he does accept the fact that from that moment on, the whispers will be there. Did he mean to kill his own brother? Following on from this, Maekar then seems to be a slightly changed character. He was always quite stern, but he gets even darker. He gets even more focused. He feels as if the weight of the world is on his shoulders. He killed his brother, and then the crown passes on to Eris, and eventually, after time, Eris, having been king, he dies of natural causes. And again, there are rumors. Perhaps this was Maekar's doing. These rumors never really left Maekar. There is, it has to be said, no evidence to say that he did do any of this. There's no evidence that he was particularly ambitious. But all the way through his life, these kind of rumors followed him, and his dark mood followed him too. During the reign of Eris started out, if you remember, we looked at him last week, he had not expected to be king. There was the Great Spring Sickness, and he was the person who survived at the other end of it. Lots of people died, 3 heirs, one king and 2 heirs to the throne died, and Eris suddenly came to power. And he decides to make Bloodraven his hand of the king. This kind of makes sense at the time. Bloodraven almost certainly was already Master of Whispers, knew what was going on. This was at a time when we've had one Blackfire Rebellion. We might have another Blackfire Rebellion. The land is not united. A good intelligence service is absolutely at the heart of what the kingdom needs. Added to which, Bloodraven seems to have done a very efficient job of ending the spring sickness in King's Landing, burning the bodies and so on. So that was quite understandable that Eris did make Bloodraven hand of the king. However, Maekar, according to some people, we do not have his side of this story, it has to be said. According to some people, Maekar was very upset by this. He thought he should have been hand of the king. And then he went and he took himself back to Summerhall. He was Prince of Summerhall, and he took himself to Summerhall, and according to various reports that we get in Dunk and Egg, that's where he just stewed and he glowered and he paced the room and just nursed all of these grudges he had, not just against Eris, but also particularly against Bloodraven. This seemed to be the big conflict that everyone was talking about in the Seven Kingdoms. We have Bloodraven, who is basically running the Seven Kingdoms because Eris didn't really seem to care that much. And then we have Maekar, who thinks that he probably should be running the Seven Kingdoms. So during that time, there is one more, well, we have 2 more rebellions. We have the second Blackfire Rebellion, which it doesn't really come to much. People were expecting, this is what we read about in the Mystery Knight in Dunk and Egg. It's noticeable that people are expecting Maekar to be leading the army against them, and Maekar doesn't turn up. This is Bloodraven, which kind of confuses a few people. Reading between the lines, it's because Bloodraven is running the country, and Maekar is indeed sitting in Summerhall and seemingly holding a grudge. Then we have the third Blackfire Rebellion, which was a lot more full-throated. This was a proper rebellion, an invasion, basically, from Essos. And on that, we do see Maekar play a full role. He seems to have been a very competent military general. He doesn't seem to have been the greatest, but it's the kind of person you would definitely trust to be leading your forces. So on that, Bloodraven led a huge part of the assault. Maekar was there as well. And the third Blackfire Rebellion was put down. We can talk about that a little bit more in detail if you want. But following that, we get Eris, who died. And Maekar takes over as king. And many people were probably expecting at this point, Maekar as king will have decided, I'm going to get rid of Bloodraven. Bloodraven is he's my real enemy. He's my real rival in all of this. I will now get rid of him. But Maekar does an intriguing thing, and he keeps Bloodraven on as Hand of the King all through his reign. And in terms of his reign, it's noticeable that actually not much happens. This is, as I say, a time of peace. This is actually a time when the Seven Kingdoms healed in a way. The later Blackfire rebellions, they're not as threatening to the Seven Kingdoms. The Seven Kingdoms really pulls together during this kind of period. And that is, as much as anything, it would appear down to Bloodraven, but also Maekar was, pardon me, very much a hands-on king. He even summoned his third son, because he had 4 sons. We've already talked about Ariel. Ariel died by drinking wildfire, thinking it would turn him into a dragon. Deeren the drunken, also died. He died from the pox. Apparently, he caught it from a sex worker somewhere. How likely you think that is, I think, is up to you. His third son, Aemon, had been sent down. This is the Maester Aemon that we know much later in the Song of Ice and Fire. As I say, we're at this kind of hinge point where we're starting to see characters that we know in the later story. Aemon, he brought back from the Citadel to be in King's Landing, although Aemon then decided, actually, I'm going to go over to Dragonstone. It would undermine the Grand Maester if I was there, because he's supposed to be the Maester in King's Landing, and now I've been brought back and I'm the King's son, and that might get a bit awkward. So he then headed off over to Dragonstone to be the Maester there. There was one uprising, or there were a couple of uprisings during this period. We have one which was House Lothston, not so much as an uprising as a sort of a putting down. Mad Danel Lothston. We're not told the details, but they were the ruling house of Harrenhal. And they got Bloodraven put that down. She was a magic user, allegedly, and then turned to the dark arts, and apparently Bloodraven turned that down. Then we get the Peak Uprising, which is what it was known as. And in this Bloodraven, House Peak, incidentally, you might remember the name. They were Sir Unwin Peak, hugely important and quite controversial figure from the regency of Aegon III. House Peak consistently been picking the wrong side ever since then. They were involved in the Blackfire rebellions. They lost power. They lost some of their castles. Here, this seems to be pretty much their last hurrah. There's an uprising, and Maekar decides himself to lead the attack, and he dies in that. Now, this is again the latest in a string of these accidental deaths, unexpected deaths, early deaths that we have for the Targaryens. Somebody threw a rock off of the walls and it hit him and he died. Of course, that could happen. It's entirely feasible. It's a war. People die in wars. But then you look back and you see all the other people who've died during this period, and you go, maybe there is slightly more to it than that. But he died, leaving somewhat of a succession crisis. Now, this is a bit of an odd one in the sense that there actually was a clear person to take over, which is Egg. He was Aegon the Unlikely, because he was the fourth son of a fourth son. But realistically, none of the other candidates were going to be supported. The only other possible person is Maester Aemon, who immediately took himself out of the running and said, "You're not going to free me from my vows. I'm not going to become king. I'm supporting Aegon." So Aegon then took over from Maekar. So that's a sort of a top-level summary of who we have here in King Maekar. He's I think the last time I, as a sort of a throwaway comment, referred to him as the Stannis of 100 years earlier, which is probably a bit unfair to him. The similarities are there in that he seems to have been very competent. He seems to have been very focused in on his duty and what he ought to be doing. He is king, and he seems to do a good job as king. He seems to have lost whatever sense of humor he had to start with. And he seems, as far as we can tell, to have been immensely pragmatic. So, and proud of his family. So that's where the kind of the links across to Stannis are. I don't think it's not by any means a perfect analog. They are different characters. But if you're wanting a kind of like a feel for a character, then I think that's a good starting point for this. Let's go and have a look in the chat. Maura Lee saying a show of, hi there Maura, saying a show of love, support and appreciation for the content, merch and stories on Well Told Tale. Love and hugs to Dan, your handsome dog. Thank you very much indeed. And also saying to the moderators, let's go to Ranabir Mitra saying, evening Robert, a reference to your video on the bloodlines of Azor Ahai. Is it the Dane blood that made Maekar have such a burst of dragon dreamer children? So yeah, I did a video ages ago, and I have a sort of a related question to this, which we will come on to. But Maekar married quite young, actually, and as far as we can tell, if it might not have been for love, but it certainly wasn't a hugely political marriage. House Dane, just to sort of put them in context, because we often only think of them in terms of their role in sort of prophetic stuff and with Rhaegar and things like that. House Dane they're obviously not the top rank of families. They're not like the Lannisters, the Starks, the Targaryens, whatever. Then they're not the Lords Paramount, but they are very much the next step down. You find this in each of the different regions of the Seven Kingdoms, is that you get the main house, and then underneath that there's 2, 3, 4 maybe houses that are old, they're respected, they're probably rich, and they're powerful. So just to pick the north, for example, then obviously you have House Bolton, but you also have people like I've forgotten who they are now. in White Harbour. I always have a mind blank on every single live stream. I have a mind blank. Somebody in the chat will pick me up on that, I feel sure. And then you get a couple of other ones like House Dustin are a big house up there. You get the Carstarks, you get the Umbers, and those are like the top houses. Underneath that, you then get the smaller houses. Underneath them, you get even smaller houses. So House Dane are kind of tier 2. This is why you get them being, well, all the way through the history of the Seven Kingdoms, they're being married off to important and influential families. So this may well have been a sort of a love match, but he married a Dane. And then flowing from this, then, yeah, he had 4 children who, well, he had 5 children, 4 sons. And you look at Ariel, who, yeah, he wasn't a very nice character, but he certainly seemed to be very obsessed with dragons, to be drinking wildfire thinking that he would become a dragon seems to imply he has to have become convinced somewhere along the line of the need for that he was going to be connected with dragons being reborn in some way. Diran, obviously, huge amount of dragon dreams. Aegon, definitely later on in his life, he had a fixation about dragons, and Maester Aemon, as we know, also was a bit of a dragon dreamer, not quite in the same way perhaps, but a bit. Now, was adding House Dane into this kind of DNA mix part of that? It's possible. What I would say, though, is that this isn't just Maekar and his children. This is the time at which the House of Targaryen gets most magic-y. We have obviously Bloodraven, we have Shira Seastar, we have all of the children that I've just been talking about already. We have magic-y types going on all over the place. We even you can look at some people like Diran II, who you're not counting as particularly magical, but he did certainly seem to embrace the idea of Targaryen exceptionalism in a way. So we've got the most magic-y time within the Targaryen house. Adding House Dane definitely added to that. Tazta saying a Targaryen rule without at least 2 rebellions is considered a dull affair. Yeah, absolutely. Just having a quick flick through the chat. Michelle Ramos saying, poor Diran having dragon dreams, but no one takes him seriously because he drinks away the thoughts that come from the dreams. Yeah, he's a really tragic character, I have to say. We see him a bit, certainly in the first Dunk and Egg story. And I suspect we'll see him again a bit later. He seems to be very aware of his dragon dreams. The first thing we find when we meet him, Dunk comes into the inn and then he just like looks up and says, "I've seen you, stay away from me," and then like basically runs away. So he doesn't just have these dragon dreams, he knows they come true, which, as we've seen in House of the Dragon with Helena, actually is this is a really hard burden to bear, and you can kind of understand him going to drink over it, and that, but there's a tragedy within that. Nate Davis asking about the technicalities of what causes a 7v7 instead of a 1v1 trial. Seems strange to risk 14 lives instead of 2. Yeah, it's so this appears to be a sort of you're right, you could ask or demand it. It's not a thing that sort of automatically happens, and it's something that is more holy and more right. So you have 1v1, which, yes, this is proving who's in the right, who's in the wrong. But when you have 7 versus 7, 7, you have to remember, is the magical number, obviously, of the faith of the 7. So when you have 7 versus 7, that proves that this is the god's will. So that incidentally explains why someone like Maegor, when he won his 7v7 battle way back in time, he was horrendously cruel and horrible, and probably most people didn't want him king, but he got people on his side because he'd shown in the eyes of the gods that he was in the right. And here, similarly, Dunk, what happened was the heir to the throne and somebody else died in that 7v7, but he was shown to be in the right, and nobody even quibbled about it. This was when afterwards we get this great scene. I'm sure we'll come back to it later. Maekar summons Dunk, and they have this great chat through issues about, how they're feeling about what to do with Egg. At no point in that did Maekar say, "Oh, you shouldn't have done the 7v7. I still think you might be in the wrong." It was done. It was accepted. This was what happened. This was the law of the land, and this was holy and right. And so Dunk was in the right. So it wasn't, because it's a 7v7. It's very rare. I mean, you have to find 7 people to start with. So you have to find 6 people to fight alongside you, and then 7 people to fight against. It's quite hard to get that many people who would just agree to step up to potentially die for somebody else's cause. Having a quick flick through so make sure I've not missed any more questions in the chat. I think I am caught up. So let's go with a question from Rhaegar Nargarian saying, in the spirit of when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. And I hope you've got your T-shirts now, by the way. Have you ordered them? As far as I'm aware, all the orders have now gone out. But if you've not got it soon, then let me know. I'll try and sort it out. That's not a problem at all. Do you see any evidence to support Bloodraven having a hand in Baelor Breakspear's death? If so, to what extent? And then 444 also asked, was Dunk as a magical catalyst used by Bloodraven to eliminate Baelor Breakspear, or was it an entirely accidental death? Okay, so let's get into this death of Baelor Breakspear, because this is the first real big hinge moment in Maekar's life. He killed his brother. This impacted on his psychology from that moment on. Did he kill his brother? Was this Bloodraven manipulating events behind the scenes? Was this, should Maekar have felt guilty? Well, all we have to go on is what we see in the Hedge Knight, this Dunk and Egg story. And we see this from Dunk's perspective. And what happens is we have, this is a pitched battle. So Dunk's perspective is on who he's fighting, and he's having, for a lot of this is him against Aerion Targaryen, who obviously wants to come in and kill him personally. But every now and then Dunk gets a chance to kind of look up and see what's happening elsewhere. So that's the perspective we have on all of this. So Dunk is we've had the kind of the first sorties of this. Dunk and Aerion are there fighting each other. Eventually, Dunk gets the upper hand. He's just got a shield, and he's just there. Like, he can ram it down onto Aerion, and he says, "Yield, yield," and Aerion just kind of like mutters, "Yield," doesn't even move his mouth. Dunk accepts this, kind of like half gets up, has a look around. And that's the point when we get this kind of snapshot of what's going on. This is before the killing blow. And we have Maekar, who is there, and he's got this big kind of like mace thing, real big blunt weapon. And he's up against 2 people. So it's a 2 against 1. One of them is Baelor, his brother, who's got a sword. And the other one is Lionel Baratheon, who's known as the Laughing Storm. He's Lord Baratheon, and he's got this axe. Now, Dunk can see at this moment in time that Maekar is not looking good. He's got 2 good fighters up against him. Everything we've heard is that Lionel Baratheon was a good fighter. We've already seen him in this tourney, and everything we know about Baelor is that Baelor's a very good fighter. So we're expecting at this point Maekar to be losing. However, at that point, Dunk gets distracted because Aerion, because this is what he's like, he's like reaching out for his Morning Star. He might have yielded, but nobody heard, so he's just going to carry on fighting. So he goes for that, and Dunk says, right, that's it, I've had enough. He basically just picks up Ariel and he takes him over to the edge where there are witnesses, and he's saying, say what you just said, say what you said before. And eventually Ariel has to go, okay, I yield, I withdraw my accusation. At which point Dunk then kind of like drops him and just sort of staggers off. He has been hurt badly in this battle. This was a tough battle for Dunk. So he doesn't really see what's going on elsewhere. The whole thing is called off at that point because the accusation has been withdrawn. He kind of staggers back to a tent, and everybody's sort of like slapping on the back. And Steely Pate, the guy who's done the armor, is there as well. And then in staggers Baelor Breakspear. Now, Baelor Breakspear is looking in an even worse way. And Dunk often kind of misses the point, doesn't quite understand. He can tell Dunk's not well, but he can tell that Baelor's really not good, and he's talking funny, and he wonders whether maybe he bit his tongue or something like that. And then they look at his helmet, and his helmet has been kind of like caved in. And there's even like this weird moment where they're kind of congratulating Pate and saying, "Oh, that was good. It's a good helmet." Like, normally something like that, you'd have gone straight through the helmet, gone through the metal, but no, it's a good helmet. But they then try and take the helmet off of Baelor's head, and I will spare you the grisly details, but basically that was holding him together. And that's the point at which he dies. Now, before he dies, somebody sort of says to him, what happened? And he says, I guess it must have been Maekar. He's kind of strong. So he doesn't know who hit him. And then we cut forward to the conversation I mentioned a moment ago, when we get Maekar summons Dunk after all of this. Baelor's being cremated, tourney's done, called off, and Maekar's there, and he's sort of like really introverted and sort of going, people, they'll be whispering about this forever, that I killed my brother. And I genuinely didn't mean to kill my brother. I guess it must have been me, but to be honest, I can't remember hitting him. And then he says, I guess maybe that's a blessing that I can't actually remember it, but which from his perspective, it is a blessing that he can't remember the killing blow. Otherwise that would be torturing him. But this leaves open this possibility, which is an odd possibility, that it wasn't actually Maekar, because Maekar can't remember doing it. Baelor, before he died, specifically says he can't remember Maekar doing it either. The idea that it was Lionel Baratheon seems a bit odd, because he had an axe. Maybe it was like a one-headed axe and he had a blunt bit on the other side. Who knows? He was certainly a very big and imposing fighter. He certainly had the brute strength to do it. But whatever it was, nobody at the time thought that it was a killing blow, so perhaps nobody paid attention. Against it is the idea that there were witnesses, hundreds, if not thousands of witnesses. So it's not as if there could have been like some other random person coming in and doing it. So could this have been Bloodraven? Potentially. George R. R. Martin has given us the wiggle room to believe that that's possible. But at the same time, I think we can be pretty clear Maekar didn't intend to kill him. But if you had to say Occam's razor, what's most likely in the heat of the battle he did, and that's what the result was. With George R. R. Martin, though, I always come back to this thing when I'm talking about prophecy and visions, is that actually the truth of the matter matters less than what people believe. The issue of Stannis being Azor Ahai reborn is less important, in fact, as far as the story is concerned, than the fact that Melisandre believes it absolutely. That's what's driving the action. Melisandre believing it absolutely. Here, what's important actually perhaps is not who did the ultimately killing blow. Maybe Lionel Baratheon had accidentally, on a backswing or something, whacked him round the head. Maybe it was that. But what matters is that Maekar thought that he probably must have done it. And everybody else thought that he probably must have done it. And that is what was driving the action. Let's go to question from Ishik Sahar saying, "Hi Robert, what do you think of the idea that Lionel Baratheon is the one who delivered the killing blow to Baelor the Blessed?" Well, I was covering that just a moment ago, so hopefully that answers that one. But yeah, I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. Maybe we will find out later on. Lionel Baratheon's not going away in this story, incidentally. He's going to come back later. He's, in fact, there's a big confrontation between him and Dunk much later in the story, because we get Aegon. When Aegon Egg comes to the throne, he then tries to marry off his children to influential families around Westeros, and the Baratheons are one of them. And Duncan, his son Duncan, was supposed to marry a Baratheon, and that gets broken off. And Lionel Baratheon pretty much rebels against the Iron Throne, and Dunk has to go and sort it out. So this is not the last we've heard of Lionel Baratheon. It's not just like he was a throwaway character who happened to be there. He is a character who we'll come back to. So perhaps George R. Martin has left the door open to that. Yeah, we didn't see it, so we don't know for sure either way. Andrew Kay saying it does seem accidental. Maekar seems remorseful and can't even remember the killing blow. And he marks the death anniversary every year. Yeah, so he takes it on. As I said, this is the key thing, is that he takes on the blame, and he marks the anniversary of Baelor's death every year from that moment on for the rest of his life. So he carries the guilt of that all the way through. Just go a quick flick through. Yes, Andrew K. Interesting. Maybe picking up this for Dr. Debunk. Didn't see the earlier comment saying a switch of roles there. The anvil became the hammer, and the hammer the anvil. This is actually something I didn't mention in my initial overview. That first Blackfire Rebellion, Maekar did play a role. The Battle of the Redgrass Fields, which is the key battle in that rebellion. We often think of the key thing being Bloodraven and his archers taking out Daemon Blackfire and his sons. And yes, this is absolutely true. That's what swung the battle. But they probably wouldn't have got into position but for the work of these two brothers, Baelor Breakspear and Maekar. And they had different roles. Maekar was he had his army lined up, and they held position, and the opposition, the Blackfire Pretenders' army, came and attacked their position. Meanwhile, the swifter moving forces from Baelor came in and attacked from behind, and it was called the Hammer and the Anvil, and it was like the hammer banging down on the anvil, and to the extent that people wrote a song or songs about this is how the war or the battle was won, perhaps wishing to give credit to Baelor. They didn't really want to give credit to Bloodraven because nobody really liked Bloodraven. Certainly Maekar came out from that thinking he hadn't been given enough credit. He'd been the one soaking up all the pressure, and then you get the Baelor coming in and attacking the enemy and causing huge amounts of damage. But yes, in terms of the kind of the flip there, you get Baelor being the hammer on the anvil of Maekar, and here in the tourney at Ashford Meadow, then we get the switch the other way around. Yeah. AK Channel TV saying during physical activities and fighting, you don't really remember everything because the adrenaline's so high. Yeah, I think George R. Martin, he does this really well, particularly as showing us through Dunk's perspective. He doesn't see everything. And it does that. I mean, the other small clue, though it is, that we have is that when Dunk does get this kind of snapshot of what's going on in that bit of combat, he actually thinks Maekar's in trouble. He doesn't think that Baelor's going to get hurt in some way. He thinks Maekar's in trouble. And that's when he thinks to himself, I need to end this. And that's when he picks up Ariel and goes over and makes him officially yield, because he thinks more people are going to die. And he doesn't, Dunk, being a good soul, doesn't want more people to die for his sake. So, yeah. It's something happened to change the way that small combat was going. Michelle Romeo is saying, loving the discussion right now, because when I read The Hedge Knight, I took the book at its word and assumed that it was Maekar, and now my mind is being blown. I should have known better. Well, yeah, it might have. This is the thing, is that George R. R. Martin gives us the perspective, one perspective from Dunk. And then he gives us another perspective from Maekar, who thinks, I can't remember doing it, but it must have been me. And then we get another from Baelor, who basically says the same thing. I didn't see him do it, but it must have been him. And it's like, we then go away and write in our brains, oh, that's what happened. But we don't know. It's not 100% certain that's what happened. Okay, let's go to question connected to this. Diego Godoy saying, hola, Robert, hola. Why did Maekar let Egg go squire for Dunk at the end of the Hedge Knight? He didn't seem too keen on allowing him to go, but what do you think changed his mind? Yeah, I think this is a really interesting and good bit of writing from George R. R. Martin. Again, this is that same conversation. We've had the Trial of the Seven, then Baelor gets cremated, and then Dunk's kind of like hanging around, and it seems he's been hanging around, and if you remember, he's got this sort of mini camp set up down by the river under a tree, and he's clearly been just what just happened, how, all this was to save my foot, and this has cost the life of a crown prince. He's wrestling with these issues. And he talks to Maekar, and the first half of it is this, I'm going to be troubled by this all of my life. Clearly, you're going to be troubled by this all of your life. And then they kind of get around to this questionable, what happens now? And the context is really important here, because you have to remember what I said at the beginning, why Maekar was there in the first place. He seems to have been an incredibly proud family man. 4 boys that he absolutely loves, and he thinks that them being in this tourney is somehow they're going to prove themselves. And Ariel, his eldest, who seems to have until that point mostly been behaving himself around his father, reveals his true colors. Deeren basically just noped out of it and just drank down in and in all the time. He is hugely disappointed at this point. Both of them lied to him personally. Deeren, who we naturally have some sympathy for, he tried to get himself out of trouble by saying, yeah, Dunk abducted Egg. Deeren admits later, that was a mistake. I'm sorry. Ariel doesn't. And Maekar basically says, okay, I've exiled Ariel for a couple of years. I'm sending him to the Free Cities. Hopefully he'll learn some lessons there. And Dunk, typical Dunk, just sort of thinks to himself, I've never been to the Free Cities. I don't know whether or not that would work or not, but I'm glad he's not in the Seven Kingdoms anymore. And then comes the question of Egg, the other son who's there. And Maekar still seems to be going down this thought pattern that his sons need to be able to prove themselves as knights and in tourneys and things like that. And he says, Egg, it's time for him to be a squire now. This is the next step in his journey. He needs to learn a bit of discipline as a squire. But the problem is that he is adamant that he only wants to be a squire for you, Dunk. Now, this could be a problem. Obviously, this could be a problem. But Maekar, seemingly in a very pragmatic way, then says, I've got a plan. And the plan is you swear fealty to me. I set you up down in Summerhall. You can be there. You can train Egg. He can be your squire. And at the same time, yeah, you're clearly good at fighting, but there's a few raw edges there, rough edges. I can get my sergeant at arms to be training you up as well. And this is a good deal. And Dunk thinks to himself and says, I even a few days ago I'd have jumped at that chance. But now everything he's seen, he doesn't want to. He wants to carry on being a hedge knight. He wants to carry on wandering the Seven Kingdoms. And he says this to Maekar, and he basically says, no, I want to go out and wander the Seven Kingdoms. But hey, Egg can come with me. And Maekar is like, no. But then he can see that Dunk is kind of holding something back, and he says, what is it? What? Just spit it out. What's the point you want to make here? And Dunk, Dunk doesn't think of himself as brave at any point, but given the context, this is quite a brave thing to say. He then says, well, look, it just kind of occurred to me that your two sons who completely disappointed you, Ariel, who was completely horrific, Deeran, who was turned into not the son you want him to be, I bet they spent all their time in palaces and castles and eating the finest food. And he kind of lets it trail off, and it's like, what harm could it do for Egg, to go out? Because clearly what you're suggesting, Maekar, is actually, it doesn't work. It's not the best way. And Maekar just kind of looks at him and kind of for a long time, and then sort of admits defeat. It was a blow to the place that seemed to hurt him the most, his sons. And he had no answer to it. His two sons had failed. In his eyes, his two sons had failed, despite the very thing that he wants Egg to do. And it's almost, he's going, okay, we can try this. And so that's what changed his mind. Dunk changed his mind simply by pointing out those two sons there didn't turn out how you wanted. Let's try something different. Michelle Rimo saying, Dunk low-key telling off Targaryen royalty is always my favourite part of Dunk and Egg. They're always so shocked at how much sense he makes. Absolutely. Lucian's saying there's something quite sad about Maekar as a character. As the last surviving Targaryen of his generation, and with the guilt of kinslaying, he seems like a mix between Stannis and Viserys the First on the show. Yeah, actually, that's another. Yeah, the sort of the guilt. That's a really good point. Thank you for that. The guilt that he feels all the way through this is very reminiscent of, if you remember, King Viserys from House of the Dragon, that he carried that guilt all the way through for the death of his wife that he basically caused. So, yeah, the cross between Stannis and Viserys is an interesting mix. think that's me. Northern Tommy saying, A Clash of Kings is my most reread book as it's my favourite, but I'm now on A Storm of Swords, reading the entire series now that I have in Deep Geek to inspire me. I'm also rereading my way through A Storm of Swords, or re-listening. I'm listening this time through, trying to do it slowly, just one chapter at a time, stop, consider it. It's A Storm of Swords is certainly growing on me on the re-listen, it has to be said. A Clash of Kings is a great book, though. Probably my favourite, but I'll let you know once I've got my way all the way back through it. Okay, let's go to a question. I've had, three of my patrons all asked similar questions, so I kind of bundled them together. That's okay. King of Imps saying, "Hey, Robert, hey." Saying, in his earlier life, we're told that Maekar resented that Bloodraven was hand and felt that honour should be his. But when he becomes king, he keeps Bloodraven in that position. What reason does he have for doing that, despite apparently disliking the man? 444 says, as Maester suggested, there was some kind of personality clash between Bloodraven and Maekar. Why wasn't Brendan deposed from the office here? And Michelle Ramos saying, I was wondering, since Maekar had issues with Bloodraven, why did he keep him on as Hand of the King? So this is an interesting one, because I think there are a couple of answers to this. The first one is, who would he have put on there other than Bloodraven? Who were the other options? Well, he almost certainly doesn't want Ariel, his son. He almost certainly doesn't want his son Deeren. Aemon has been sent down to the Citadel, and Egg was still relatively young, and we're not entirely sure where Egg is at this point, but he's out and about in the Seven Kingdoms. So Bloodraven is probably the best, pragmatically the best candidate. Added to which there are hints that perhaps there might have been the growth of a degree of respect here. If we do see Maekar as this kind of pragmatic person, then Bloodraven has proven his loyalty. There's no real doubt about that. Certainly during the first Blackfire Rebellion, the second Blackfire Rebellion, he was all over it. The third Blackfire Rebellion, he was leading the attack, was Bloodraven, and it was him and Ariel who were there saying, well, we need to kill off this Aegor, basically. We need to kill off Aegor Rivers. And then Eris was the person who overruled them. We don't hear which way Maekar went on this, but the implication is that Maekar probably would have sided with Bloodraven, and so he can actually start to see the benefits of what Bloodraven has done. So, added to which, as I say, this is probably the most magic-y period, and Bloodraven is in tune with all of that magic-y stuff. So there seems to be a who else was a better candidate issue. There seems to have been a pragmatically, he seems to have won a bit of respect, perhaps, from Maekar. There might have been an element here of him thinking that actually I'm going to rule the Seven Kingdoms. Eris took a big backseat to Bloodraven and let Bloodraven do everything, but Maekar doesn't seem to be that kind of person. And then finally, I think we have to challenge a little bit this narrative which is there that there was a huge falling out between Maekar and Bloodraven. Now, it certainly makes sense. Maybe there was a personality clash. But who do we hear these stories? Who do we hear from about these stories that Maekar is there holding grudges against his brother and against Bloodraven? These, we hear about them in the Dunk and Egg stories, and we hear about them from people sympathetic with the Blackfire cause. And so we shouldn't necessarily just take them at face value. It's very much in the Blackfire cause's best interests for Bloodraven, who is not liked at all, and Maekar to be presented as being at odds, with Maekar to be a sore loser. He's the person he thought that he should have the power because, you know, he killed his brother. Maybe he's going to kill, again, this is another rumor we get, maybe he's going to kill his other brother. Maybe he's desperate for power. He doesn't deserve it. It's not his. He's just trying to get power. The true kings are the kings, the Blackfires. So I think we have to take a small pinch of salt when we're looking at those kinds of rumors, and think about where they're coming from. Question from Johnny Targs saying, when the time comes for the Dunk and Egg show on television, do you think they may hint at Maekar at least taking part in Aerys the First's death to place himself on the Iron Throne? Well, I think perhaps by this point in the live stream, you're kind of getting the feel for where I'm going with this character. It's entirely possible. We just simply have no idea. Aerys died from natural causes, full stop, is all we get. We don't know any details about this. Maybe there was more to it than we know. But we've seen nothing from Maekar in actual clear evidence, other than what people say, other than hearsay. We've seen nothing that suggests that he actually was desperately trying to get the Iron Throne for himself. Egg, his son, obviously going to be on his side, but he clearly very strongly believes that he loves his brother. Maekar loves his brother Aerys. Why not? Why shouldn't he? He gets into a fight over this idea. One of the squires there at the tourney at Whitewall suddenly sort of says, oh yeah, so Maekar killed one of his brothers, and he's probably going to kill another brother as well because he hates him. And Egg basically gets into a fight over it. He sees this as a personal affront to his father, and he doesn't. And although yes, he's obviously biased, Egg. He's obviously going to be on his father's side, but you would have thought that if Maekar was actively trying to get rid of Aerys so that he could have the throne, then he might start talking down Aerys to his family, might start making them think that maybe he should be there. But no, we don't get that. We get Aemon, another good judge of people, again his son, so will be biased, but says, I wish I could remember the exact quote, but he basically says, yeah, my father always was troubled by the death of Baelor's death. He carried that around with him, and he saw the Iron Throne almost as his punishment for that. He had to do this. That's not the mark of somebody who was desperately wanting power. This events happened that put him on the Iron Throne, and he saw it almost as his penance to be ruling because of what he did. Just having a quick flick through the chat. Dr. Debunk, I've always wondered about the possibility that Baelor was kicked by a horse in the midst of the trial by Seven, maybe even a skin changer controlled horse. Who to blame? Yes. So if you're looking, that's a good point. So going back to the Tony Ashford, when we get Baelor who gets the back of his helmet bashed in. If we say Baelor didn't see Maekar do it, Maekar can't remember doing it, and if we say that the only other person there, Lionel Baratheon, had an edged weapon, not a blunt weapon, then we know that by this point Maekar was off of his horse. So this is sort of hand-to-hand combat, and there are horses being frightened and running around. Yes, he could easily have been whacked by a horse hoof, a horse rearing up. You'd think people might see that, but maybe not in the heat of the battle. So it's entirely possible. And if you want to go the extra when in doubt, blame Bloodraven route, then yeah, who could be walking into a horse in order to make them do that? Renabir Mitra saying, I used to get scared during these streams because it's so much lore. But this last week, I've started with IDG's Legends of Middle-earth playlist, and now I feel ready. Well, yeah, so obviously there isn't a Middle-earth one, but we'll be getting back to that next time. Quickly flick through. Andrew K saying, don't see it with Maekar, don't get the rumblings like we did around Aegon IV that mentioned a few times he always had an eye on the throne, even as a boy. Yeah, Maekar doesn't seem to want he doesn't seem to want that. He doesn't want to be king. Tuster saying, the perfect birthday present. Happy birthday to you. I hope you have a wonderful name day. As always, thank you for the great content and special shout outs to the moderators. Yes, I will very quickly pause to say, moderators, thank you. You do an amazing job. If you are watching this live, if you're in the live chat, please could you show them a little bit of love? They do a fantastic job. And also patrons. While I'm thanking people, patrons, thank you so much. I hugely appreciate your support too. If you would like to support the channel, there is a link probably appearing somewhere in the live chat right now. And if you're watching later, there will be a link appearing down in the description, also at the end of the video, lots of different places. But yes, Patreon is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Tazter saying, what was Maekar's relationship with Egg like? Which is interesting because we don't know. We don't really see them together. Now, Egg, at the time of the first Dunk and Egg story, is about 9. So, what do we know about his life before that? Not huge amounts. He seems to have been in King's Landing for a couple of years at least as a page, sort of being taught about court life, that he spent some time at Summerhall. He was certainly given a dragon egg, which seems to imply a certain degree of care or honor. But at the same time, he does seem to have this view that if you're going to be, a good son for me, then you have to grow up along these lines. You have to be a good fighter. You have to be a page, then a squire, then presumably a knight. After that, you have to be doing well in tourneys. That doesn't seem to be, Egg, as far as we can tell, seems to come out as a reasonable fighter, but that's not really him. And so we do seem to get the impression that Maekar perhaps was, certainly to start with, trying to force Egg into being somebody that he didn't really want to be with. He seemed to have, he definitely didn't like his brother Ariel. He seemed to get on okay with Deeren, but his favourite was Aemon, who, as we know, Maester Aemon was very bookish. They weren't. When they were thinking about the Battle of the Redgrass Field, it was noticeable. One of these anecdotes we get is that they didn't go out, get dressed up and try and hit each other and pretend to be fighting it. They got a big table and then tried to strategically recreate it with all sorts of moving pieces. So that seems to be more who Egg was. Now, The twist, obviously, when we get to the Hedge Knight, is that Maekar kind of comes to some realization that what he was doing was not working for his two eldest sons. So at that point, it's almost as if he kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, okay, we'll try something else. And that trying something else is allowing his 9-year-old son to wander around the highways and byways of the Seven Kingdoms without like saying, well, you've got to come back every 6 months or something like that. He just basically says, okay, go. If you get into trouble, here's how you get out of it. He gave him like a little sigil thing that he could use to, he's got some jewels that he can use for money. So he's sort of like he's looking after him, but he's basically saying, goodbye, 9-year-old son, now you're on your own. So I think it's probably fair to say that their relationship was not a close one. It might have been a loving one, but it doesn't seem to have been a particularly close one. Question from Philip. This is one from a little while ago. Apologies, I only just picked this one up. Philip said it was a terrible injustice that little Maegor was passed over to select Egg to succeed Maekar. All hail Maegor II, the true king. Little laughing emoji there. So yeah, this is after Maekar's death, and we have a great council, and Egg is chosen. Now we have a few people who are passed over. We get Vaela, who's the daughter of Deer and the Drunken, who is described as being a sweet and simple child, and we can perhaps guess that maybe she was a dragon dreamer. Then we get this other character called Maegor. Now Maegor was Arian's son. Now his claim on paper was probably stronger than Egg's. Arian was an older brother. He had a son. Normally, that's the way that you would go. It certainly that's how it seemed to work with Baelor. When Baelor died, his sons then took the next place in the line of succession. So, yes, potentially, but he was a child, and added to which his father was Arian, who everybody knew they did not want as king. And Arian decided to call his son Maegor deliberately to echo Maegor the Cruel. And so everyone was just like, I'm not entirely sure we really want a complete child on the throne who means that other people are really running the Seven Kingdoms. We want to have a strong king. And secondly, he's Arian's son, and he's got the name Maegor. This doesn't bode well. Pardon me. So yeah, it's a useful reminder, even at this stage in the Targaryen history, that it wasn't just who's technically next in line who gets made the king. It's who has either the biggest army or the most support. Martin S. saying, I recently rewatched early episodes of House of the Dragon. In a tournament, some participant got his head crushed, literally, which makes me wonder, how violent are they allowed to be? Is killing allowed like that? Well, yes, it's allowed, but you're supposed to... It depends really on what's going on in the tourney and where you're at. If you're in the jousting, there are general rules, and you're not supposed to be trying to kill the other person. You're supposed to be trying to unhorse them. When you get to a melee tournament, then they're often, they have sort of rules, but if you say yield, then that's supposed to be it. Then you can like depart and you can move on to the next person. But people did die because you weren't using blunt weapons, you were using real weapons, and you were actively trying to hurt the other person. So people died out of pure accident, but also you get that kind of like fine line, and we see this a few different times. We see what happens with the Mountain in book 1 when he gets a bit angry and he attacks his horse, and then the Hound has to jump in. That does happen. It's not supposed to happen, but it does happen. And you also saw, if you think back to House of the Dragon, I think it was episode 1, actually, when you get Daemon there fighting Criston Cole, and Daemon's not exactly fighting in an honourable way. You should fight in an honourable way, but you can't always make sure everyone does it. Let's go to Os just asking about Good Omens. Yes, I am a massive fan of Good Omens, the book. I'm a massive fan of Good Omens season 1. Season 2 is coming out tomorrow. Yes, I'm very much looking forward to it. And for those, this is a digression, so apologies, I'll be back on track in just about 30 seconds. For those who are thinking, hang on a moment, there was only one Good Omens book. How on earth are they making Good Omens season 2? Well, the book was co-written by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett, of course, sadly died a few years ago. But Neil Gaiman tells the wonderful story of just after they'd written that first book, and before either of them were particularly famous, they came over from England to somewhere in America for a convention, and they were sharing a room, and they seemed to live sort of opposite lifestyles. Terry Pratchett was very much a daylight person. Neil Gaiman was very much a nighttime person. And Terry Pratchett, and they both had some degrees of jet lag, and Terry Pratchett's idea was to stay in the hotel room and try and go to sleep, and Neil Gaiman's idea was I'll just ride it through and then I'll come back later to the hotel room. And when Neil Gaiman came back late at night, they were both still absolutely wide awake. And at that point, they then wrote the outline for a second book in Good Omens. They did the outline for what it was going to be. They said, okay, when we get back from this, then we can start writing it. But as it happens, that's when life got good for both of them career-wise, and they never actually got around to writing it. But they do have this outline that was written by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, and that is going to be the basis of season 2 of Good Omens. So if you like it, I'm very much looking forward to it. I think that's on Amazon. Okay, let's go to a question from Taster. Another question about Maekar's relationship with his son Aemon. So, I mean, this is sort of a follow-up from his the relationship he had with his son Aegon. We perhaps know even less than this. Now, Aemon was slightly older than Aegon, but he was sent down quite early to the Citadel. Now, this was not Maekar's choice, incidentally. This was Deeren II. When Deeren was king, Deeren II, he basically said, too many Targaryens are as bad as too few. And by this point, he had 4 sons, and 3 of them already had sons of their own. And so Maekar had 4 sons. He was thinking, okay, Targaryens do like to engage in a bit of civil war every now and then. Why don't we try and just like take 1 or 2 out of the system? And so he basically decided that Aemon should go down to the Citadel. We don't hear after that whether Maekar visited him at all. We know Aegon did. But the implication is that he was a bit too young to have had that much of a strong relationship with his father at that point. It probably was quite similar to Egg's in that he will probably have thought initially he wanted him to be a page and then a squire and then a knight. He did get summoned. When Maekar became king, he got summoned from the Citadel up to King's Landing. And Maekar appears to have wanted him to be there in King's Landing and just sort of advise him as his son, as somebody that he trusted. But Aemon said no, and he went on to Dragonstone, and he basically there advised Egg. Deeren, sorry, not Egg. He then advised Deeren. So, and this is where Deeren and Aemon will probably have exchanged ideas. So the relationship appears not to have been strong, because the one moment after, he was sent down when he was still a child to the Citadel, the one moment when he could have then come back and re-established that relationship with his father, he then decides to just say, nope, I'm not staying here. I'm going on to go and help out one of your other sons. And while we're sort of on this sort of line, 444 said, is there a good chance that Vaela, daughter of Deeren the Drunkard, who we mentioned a moment ago, had the same talent as her father? And should we assume that whenever maesters describe any Targaryen female as simple-minded, she is in fact a dragon dreamer? Well, this is entirely possible. I would say it's likely that she was a dragon dreamer. I would... the language echoing from Helena is very clear. Now, it should be pointed out, Helena, who we now know of in House of the Dragon as being a dragon dreamer, that's not really even hinted at in Fire and Blood. It's only when we got to House of the Dragon that was like, oh, so that's what's going on. Now, because the language is echoed, I think we're supposed to make this kind of connection here, particularly given the fact that her father was Deeren, and we don't know exactly how these things work out, but maybe it's like father, like daughter. That might have been the case. What is interesting is that we don't really hear about her afterwards. So exactly what her fate is, we don't know. But I don't think we've come across any other in the chat. I'm sure somebody will be able to remember one, but I don't think we come across any other characters who are simply described as being simple-minded that might be dragon dreamers. But yeah, the maesters are the bigger issue here is that the maesters are very much prejudiced against this kind of stuff. They never view magic in a positive way. It's really high. If you go through Fire and Blood, almost every time somebody is involved with magic, it's described in a sinister way, particularly when it's a woman. Women tend to be viewed as being witches or involved in dark magic. Very rarely is it seen as a positive thing. Men can perhaps sometimes dabble in it, but even then, from the Maester's perspective, it's not a good thing. So this does seem to be another way of them just kind of like trying to do it down, just saying somebody's simple-minded. Let's go to a question from King of Imps saying Bittersteel married one of Daemon Blackfire's daughters. We're later told that the Blackfire line had died out, but only in the male line. Could the current claimant, presumably Fagon, be descended from Bittersteel? And if so, did Bittersteel engineer it that way so that his descendants would wind up with the claim and Blackfire? So I will talk about Fagon in just one moment, but I wanted to come at this from the angle of what hints do we get about Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, at the time and his kind of motivations. He's presented very much, for the first Blackfire Rebellion, very much he's presented as the power behind the throne, the person who's pushing for this. Daemon Blackfire was, I think it was 8 years before, of his half-brother's rule, before he rebelled. And even then, he hadn't actually rebelled yet. It was just the rumor that he was about to rebel. Aegor Rivers Bittersteel had been pushing for this all this time. So he's the real driving force behind this. He's the one who took the sword Blackfire back. He did indeed marry into the Blackfire family. So his children, and we don't read about who they are, his children definitely will have also been Blackfires. So he married one of Daemon Blackfire's daughters. We know what happened to all of Daemon Blackfire's sons. But the most interesting thing that we read about, which is even commented on by the characters in this, because it's curious, is the fact that when we get the second Blackfire Rebellion, which is, it doesn't get very far, but it gets far enough that people meet up for a massive planning meeting, and Daemon II, the heir, comes over, and they're discussing plans with him about how they might be taking the Iron Throne. So we think of this as being, it was stopped before it became a thing. The planning had been there. Aegor Rivers will have known this was happening. Of course he will, because Daemon Blackfire's heir was now launching another coup. Aegor was not involved in this. And everyone is intrigued by this, or Bloodraven certainly is intrigued by this. Why did Bittersteel not come across? Why didn't he give him the sword Blackfire, which is, a claim to legitimacy? It's really intriguing. And you do have to wonder whether Aegor, although he backed other pretenders after that, is he actually kind of holding back? Is he not 100% behind the absolute cause that is the Blackfire true heir has to be there? Is he just picking the winner? Because also the Blackfire, Aegor was involved in later Blackfire, the third Blackfire Rebellion, and they didn't capture the sword Blackfire, which seems to imply it wasn't handed on, which seems to imply that Bittersteel kept hold of it somewhere, and for what and for who, we don't know. So those are the questions we have at the time. Is it possible that the Blackfire line down through his wife, him and his wife being the daughter of Daemon Blackfire, that is Fagon, the character we know as Fagon, the character who claims to be Aegon VI? Well, it is very possible. I personally think we get quite a few clues, and this perhaps came down all the way down to Illyrio marrying Sarah, who seemed to have had blonde hair and very blue eyes or something along those lines. And the implication is perhaps Fagon is the child of that match, and that has worked its way down from Bittersteel. So there are hints there. Illyrio himself, just when Tyrion says stuff like, yes, but the Blackfire line has gone, Illyrio says the male line has gone. not necessarily the female line, which clearly shows that he knows to start with, and he is taking an active interest. And then we get a whole load of these other kind of hints. Blackfire, the sword Blackfire, as I say, it's been missing. It wasn't given to the Golden Company. And the hints are that Illyrio has it and will be giving it to Phagon as a way to authenticate his claim. The Golden Company, this might be a visual thing more than anything else, but they are associated with the Blackfire rebellions and supporting the Blackfire cause, and they are the first thought for Phagon and Illyrio and the backers. We're going to get them on our side. They're backing us. So that kind of clue is there. There's also a few other ones that are more kind of thematic. There's talk of the black, there's a dragon, an N sign, which is of a black dragon, and then it gets caught up in the water and it goes all rusty and it turns red. And so it's like, oh, actually, this is a red and black dragon issue. What you're trying to say is maybe something that looks like a red dragon is actually secretly a black dragon. And there are a lot more clues just kind of dropped around here. Nothing that we can say is 100% conclusive yet, but certainly all the evidence does seem to be suggesting that Phagon he's the Mummer's dragon. He's not who he claims to be. Again, this is the vision that Danny got in the House of the Undying. He's a cloth dragon. He's not a real Targaryen, but he does come from the Blackfire line. Question from Michelle Raimo saying, during Maekar's reign is when Mad Danelle Lothston really turned to the dark arts, but from the Mystery Knight, we know that she was an ally of House Targaryen and Bloodraven, another magic user. How do you think Maekar and Bloodraven came to an agreement to put an end to her magic, while Bloodraven continued to use his? Magic being something Maekar seemed not to be a fan of. So yeah, this is, I touched on this a bit ago. It's not really a rebellion, but we're told that this is a thing which happened during Maekar's reign. House Lothston were an old and well-respected house, and they had been given Harrenhal. They were the people who owned Harrenhal. And Danelle Lothston, we do see her or get mention of her certainly in the Mystery Knight. She is there basically at the head of one of the armies coming to support Bloodraven to surround White Walls and end the war. So she was called upon and came to Bloodraven's aid. Does this make her an ally? Perhaps this just makes her the kind of person who just sees which way the wind is blowing and then goes with that. So she, at some point during Maekar's reign, seems to have turned, or we're told turns to blood magic, and then that gets put down, and the House Lothston basically gets wiped out. There's not much of them left, and they get wiped out. Now, how and why might that happen? Well, it could just be something we take at face value and say, okay, yeah, maybe she did suddenly turn a bit evil, and Bloodraven had to put her down. We're not given the details, but perhaps that's what happened. Perhaps this wasn't an issue of Maekar seeing a magic user and deciding, I don't want magic users. It was just here's somebody doing bad things, let's get rid of her. There is one more intriguing possibility if you're going down the when in doubt blame Bloodraven route, which is you have to ask, who is it who got Harrenhal after House Lothston, who were brought to an end basically by this? And the answer is House Went. Now, why is that important? Well, House Went were the people who hosted the tourney at Harrenhal sometime later in the build-up to Robert's Rebellion. And it wasn't just this happens to have been where this was. We get it being held there because Oswell went, a member of the Knights Guard, was close to Rhaegar. So he was in on this. So he actually, and let's not forget the tourney at Harrenhal was an attempt by Rhaegar. It didn't work because his dad turned up, but it was an attempt by Rhaegar to get everybody onto his side so that he could launch a sort of a mini coup against his father, the Mad King, who everybody really did not like. So this would have got Rhaegar onto the throne, and Bloodraven's plan, it would appear, is to get Rhaegar and Lyanna together, and so their child can be the prince that was promised. That seems to be his plan, and so organizing the tourney at Harrenhal that not only was going to put Rhaegar on the throne, but also led to the introduction pardon me, led to the introduction of Rhaegar and Lyanna. That was down to House Went. So yeah, it depends how far down that rabbit hole you wish to go. Let's go to Martin S saying, was magic forbidden in tournaments and duels? Could a shadow of the kind that killed Renly be prepared in advance to take out a duel opponent? Well, one suspects that would not be considered particularly knightly or fair. So the answer is no, you're not allowed to do that. However, sort of, it was noticeable that I can think of at least one example where you get sort of like a borderline, which is when Robert Baratheon was king, Thoros of Myr had a flaming sword that he used to take into melees, and he was obviously kind of fearsome with it, and that could have been perceived as being a bit of an advantage for him, but he was Robert Baratheon's drinking buddy, so it seems that most people just kind of like went, oh, I'm not going to raise that issue. But yeah, generally speaking, the whole point of tourneys is to show the knightly virtues. And you get this from if you look at Sansa when she's there watching the tourney in the Hands tourney in King's Landing, what she's thinking, this is what they're supposed to, this is the idealized version of what it's supposed to be like. So the most puissant knight would win, and they're there for, presenting the laurels to the most beautiful lady, and this is this kind of what we would think of this idealized view of like medieval knightly virtues. That is what this is supposed to be. So if you overtly used magic, no, that would be bad. Caius Ballerina picking up a question for Noah J. Thank you very much. I love it when people do this, saying, curious to know your thoughts on the Tattered Prince being Aerion Brightflame's son, Maegor. Okay. So, I mean, I haven't seen an argument for this, so I would have to see that it may well be that I'm missing some clues here. The Tattered Prince appears, he's a book-only character. He doesn't appear on the show. He's started out in Pentos. Pentos have a really weird kind of habit that they have and I forget what they call it now, but basically they do have a sort of an elected prince who is there, and as long as he's ruling and everything's fine, then he leads an amazing life. He's fated wherever he goes. He has wine, women, and food brought to him. It's amazing. But if things go badly, if they lose a war or something, then he is killed. Now, the Tattered Prince was made this prince, and he escaped. he thought, I'm not having this. And so he then went off, became a sellsword, founded a sellsword company, and we end up seeing him all the way over in Slaver's Bay. So is he's quite old by this point. Is he Maegor, the son of Arian Brightflame? Now, I would have to go back and double check the exact timings on this one for how old he is. So Egg, let's see whether we can work this out live. Egg became king in the year 230 AC, by which time Maegor was a baby, so maybe a year old, which means that when we get to the story, then we're looking at of A Song of Ice and Fire, we're looking at someone who's about 70. So could he have been? It's possible. Are there any hints to that in the text? I've not seen them. I've not got to that bit of my re-listen through, so maybe I will find some more on my way through. But I'd love to. Feel free to drop some in the chat if you know of some. But yeah, I'm not. I don't think there's a strong case. Sebastian Holden saying high level tinfoil. Then we get Andrew K saying, with the Blackfires, let's not forget Damon had at least 2 other daughters, if not more of them, that are not really accounted for. They could have provided other female Blackfire lines. Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of shows a bit what the attitude is towards female heirs not just in the Targaryens, but in that world at the time, is that people just forgot about it. You get rid of all of the sons, that's it. You've dealt with the problem. You've dealt with the line. So the Targaryens, as we know, have on several occasions had issues with, well, maybe the woman should be inheriting, not the man. And have, if from a historical perspective, always gone with the man. You then get Rhaenyra as the example. She got then written out of history, which is why I say from a historical perspective. Okay, let's go to Noah J saying a fair response. Good. I'm very pleased to hear that. As I say, I'm very happy to get any evidence on this. My approach always with particular Song of Ice and Fire is I don't come out with what I think of as just like random theories. What I try to do is present what I think is the best hypothesis based on the information we have. If there's stuff I've missed, if we get more information coming in, then I will happily shift what I believe about what's going on in this book. And if you can present me with some good information, I'm very happy to change my mind on it. Nate Davis, this is sort of picking up on the Maekar's relationships with his sons here, saying, it seems like Maekar had lukewarm relationships with his sons. Yes. How did Maekar handle Arian drinking wildfire and Aemon turning down the small council position? Well, we're not told, but I think that we basically have to see this character arc of Maekar as just like, he started out as being a perfectly good and solid human being. Then he got weighed down with the weight of the fact that he killed or thought that he killed his brother. Then his sons, one after another, seem to have been a disappointment to him. Arian basically killing himself because he thinks he's drinking wildfire because he thinks it might turn him into a dragon. And that seems kind of like what impact would have on Maekar? Not a good one. I think it would have just added to his downward dark spiral. The same with Aemon. He would have got good advice from the Grand Maester. I think he just wanted his son there. It seems genuinely like I want, I've lost 2 sons now. I want both of my sons here remaining here with me. And Aemon gets summoned, and then Aemon says, actually, I'm not going to stay here. And I think that he would have left Maekar kind of heartbroken from it. The only person who was left was Aegon. And I mean, this is pure speculation because we don't know it from the books and we don't know the exact timing, but it does make me wonder why. Yes, Maekar was a good and strong commander, but the peak uprising was not a huge thing. He didn't need to worry about it that much, and yet he seems to have been first in line trying to siege a castle, which, again, we don't have any evidence, but maybe he just he got so angry and frustrated about what had happened, he just wanted to go out and deal with stuff himself. It feels like a very kind of human reaction. As he gets one son dies, another son dies, a third son, seemingly from his perspective, rejects him. Suddenly up comes some jumped up nobody rebelling against him, and he says, right, that's it, I'm leading this attack. You can certainly see how that might work. As I say, we don't know all the timings on that one, and we haven't got that bit in Fire and Blood Part 2, obviously, but it kind of makes sense to me. Let's go to a question from Kristen H. saying, hello, Robert. Hope all is well for you today. It is, thank you. I have a couple of questions that stem from the line about Maekar wanting to split from the past and having a new crown forged since Aegon the Conqueror was lost in Dawn. Yeah, so the for those who are unaware of this, Maekar, the Targaryens, actually, step back. The Targaryens didn't just have one crown. There were at least 3, maybe 4 different crowns that they used during their time. And so each king kind of had to make a decision about which crown they use, and it almost sort of was their way of expressing what kind of king they were going to be. Now, Maekar, it would appear, wanted to have Aegon the Conqueror's crown, but that had got lost. So Diren the First had gone into Dawn with it, and when he got captured and then died, it was lost somewhere in Dawn. So Maekar then decided, actually, I'm going to have a completely new crown. Whether it's a throwaway line, but we're told he wanted to make a new start. So it's almost as if you could imagine that he's been through this. He's seen his brothers die. He's seen their children die. He's not expected to be king. It's almost as if he's like, right, I need a new start here. A new crown. I'll be a new king. We'll start again. His crown seems quite simple, but quite stern. Not gaudy with lots of jewels on, and that's pretty much all we hear about it. After that, he seems to be making a statement about what his character was. Questions here are, I don't recall the context, but do you think this is implying splitting from the Targaryen magical past, or from his immediate family's past, or something else altogether? I think it was not splitting from his family's history as a whole. I think this was what the last few years, which have been tragedy after tragedy for the Targaryens. There was obviously the split with the Blackfire Rebellion, that literally the 7 kingdoms split in half, neighbor against neighbor. Then there was the tragic death of Baelor. Then there was the tragic deaths, summer sickness of Baelor's children, and also Diren. Then you get this whole series of other horrendous tragic deaths, one after another. I went through them before. Choking on a lamprey pie. There's the death, being killed by your wife in a mishap, and then it sort of goes on and on. These real tragedies, and so I was like, okay, I was not expecting to be king. It happened. I have got sons who can inherit after me. We're starting again. So bang, new crown. We're starting again. And it kind of reflected also his character. This isn't going to be gaudy. We're not going to be here like we're not Aegon the Fourth just distributing, or even Viserys the First distributing all of these goodies to everybody who comes here. This is a serious business running the Seven Kingdoms. So I think that's what that was. Secondly, what do you think of the idea that Dawn is in possession of Aegon's crown, and that it will be given to Fagon as further evidence of his right to rule Westeros? So this is interesting. So is it in Dawn? It was lost in Dawn. We're not told about it afterwards. It, however, probably wasn't kept by the Martells, because the Martells then married back into the Targaryen family a few kings later, Daeron II, and the crown did not resurface. This would have been the moment that everything's forgiven. You get Baelor the Blessed, who's like come over and begged forgiveness, walked barefoot all the way across the Boneway, and he kind of kneels begging forgiveness from them. Maybe the time when we get the coming together of Dawn joining the Seven Kingdoms, and then you get the King and the Prince of Dawn, who both knelt before the statue of Baelor and said, "Baelor, your work is complete." That would have been the time to hand back the crown symbolically, but it wasn't handed back. So I don't think it was held by the Martells. There's a possibility that it might have been held by House Tollard, who's this is entirely random small house, who they have quite a history with the Targaryens, with Daeron I in particular, as well as Aegon himself, to the extent that they even changed their house sigil to be a dragon eating or chasing its own tail, sort of in mockery of the Targaryens. And we get to meet them in Arianne 2, I think it is, the pre-release chapter of The Winds of Winter, when Arianne is sort of passing through that way. So perhaps one of these other houses has kept hold of it. And if it is going to resurface, then yes, this would be exactly the kind of thing that would work to try and get authenticity for Fagon. So Fagon has basically, his pitch is, actually, I am the true heir of the Seven Kingdoms. I am Aegon VI, the child that you thought had been beaten to death. Actually, I survived. I was whisked away, and now I'm back. And to prove it, I am here on the accoutrements of being king. And he has the sword Blackfire. He will get a Kingsguard, which I suspect will start to be eerily reminiscent of the classic Kingsguards of days of yore, Aerys II's Kingsguard. He will, I think, sit on the Iron Throne. He will, if he gets, and he probably will be anointed by the High Septon equivalent, and if he gets Aegon the Conqueror's crown as well, that will make him look so legitimate. And this is the kind of thing which is, we see the huge gulf between the books and what happened on the TV show. What happened on the TV show is when Dany arrives from overseas, who does she find awaiting her? Well, Cersei's there in King's Landing. But in the books, very probably it's going to be this person claiming to be Aegon VI, claiming therefore to be ahead of Dany in the line of succession, claiming looking like he is king. The people loving him because he got rid of Cersei, who was horrendous. He's wearing Aegon the Conqueror's crown. He has the sword Blackfire, the sword that the kings, the Targaryen kings, always carried. He's got a king's guard around him. He has sat on the Iron Throne. He has been put in place by the High Septon. This is a completely different challenge, which will be facing Dany compared to the TV show, because all this time Dany has been thinking the Iron Throne is mine by rights. I am the heir to the Iron Throne. And then she gets to Westeros. Maybe Tyrion will tell her about Vagon before then, one would hope. But she gets to Westeros and discovers this other person there. How will she react to that? That would be an absolutely fascinating, different twist on what's going to be happening. Martin S. saying, is wildfire magical or merely chemical, or is that unknown? It's a bit of both as far as we can tell. It certainly seems to be chemical. Its real world equivalent obviously wasn't magical, but pardon me, Greek fire, which we've not got the recipe for anymore, but seems to have been incredibly deadly back in the day. However, that does have a magical element to it. When we're properly introduced to it, when in A Clash of Kings, Tyrion is coming up with his clever plan to defend King's Landing. And part of his clever plan, obviously, is getting lots of wildfire. And Cersei has already been trying to stockpile some of it. She likes the wildfire, does Cersei, but Tyrion's down there, and he sort of says, I want you to make more of this. How much have you got? How quickly can you make it? And they say, well, actually, a lot quicker than we used to be able to, because, and this may sound like a random question, but are there any dragons in the world at the moment? And Tyrion's like, no. Well, why is that a thing? And basically, it seems that when there are dragons in the world, it's easier to make wildfire. And when the dragons went, the alchemists they found it a lot harder to make the wildfire. It took them a lot longer to do it. And this seems to be because dragons somehow adds to the kind of the ambient level of magic in the world. So is it magical? Yes, but it's not super magical. It's definitely chemical as well. It's this kind of mix between the two. And George R. R. Martin doesn't like going into explaining these things in detail because he thinks it gets rid of the mystery. Let's go to a question from Ty Farnsworth saying, hey Robert, how was Maekar's Dornish heritage seen by the great lords of Westeros? Was he now ethnically superior or inferior to other Targaryens? Or were they reaching the point where Targaryen racial purity meant less politically than it did nearer to the invasion? Well, I think the answer to this is the latter. But Targaryen racial purity as a justification for why you're on the throne was a lot more of a Targaryen thing than it was an anyone else thing. So it's by this point, and pretty much from this point onwards, there is much more of an emphasis on the political marriages that you can have. How can that bolster your claim? How can that help secure you on the Iron Throne? Because now dragons aren't there. The need to be different and separate is slightly different. Yeah, I don't think that the people, the other lords, the people cared that much about the racial purity of the Targaryens. It was just the Targaryens who cared about that. Reflective Rambling, hi there, saying shout out to Northern Tommy for being lovely. Noah J for being a new patron, and Supermod Carl for the endless breadth of information. His comments definitely incentive for joining us live. Shout out to all of those people. Excellent. And just flicking down, if you're watching this live, Carl Carsnock has just put up a link to a video on the crown of Charlemagne. It's over 1,000 years old and still almost perfectly intact. There you go. I was unaware of the crown of Charlemagne, but if you're interested, go and check that out. And Ranabir Mitra saying, shout out to Reflective Rambling as well. Absolutely. Andrew K saying, Maekar seems to have lost his wife early, which likely added more stern or harshness. Egg confirmed as such at Ashford Meadow. Yeah, he did, absolutely. And I mean, this is quite a common thread actually through George R. R. Martin, that if you lose your wife early, then it might impact on you and make you quite stern. The classic example obviously is Tywin. Tywin was always quite a stern character. However, we're told that his lady Joanna was the only person who could make him smile, and after that he never did. In fact, there's a great line, as I'm going through Storm of Swords at the moment, there's this great line Tyrion comes out with when he's talking to his father about Robb Stark's new marriage to Jane Westerling. And we're getting a lot of hints at this point in the story that maybe Tywin knows a little bit more and is influencing a little bit more than we might otherwise have been thinking behind the scenes. And there's this great line where Tyrion says his father never smiled, but just occasionally you thought that perhaps he might be about to. And if anything, that was even more scary. And that was what was happening just there, was that Tywin wasn't smiling, but it looked as if there's just a hint that maybe he was thinking about it. Let's go to a question from Travis, which is linked to this. My question is sort of about Deanna Dane. It seems that the Targaryens have slowly been adding all the important bloodlines to theirs. Note, bloodlines, not houses necessarily. They have married in Valyrian, Velaryon, Baratheon, Rhaegar, First Men, Hightowers, Danes, and Blackwoods, Andals, the Martells, and the Arryns. The only exceptions are the Cranagmen, the Ironborn, and the Starks, although maybe not looking at you, Lyanna. I guess my question is, what do you make of this? Am I in thumbtacks and string territory? Should I touch grass? Okay, so yes, this is noticeable, and it's interesting. I did do a video on this quite some time ago. I can't remember what it was called. Something like the Bloodline of Azor Ahai, maybe something like that. And it was one I think I even recognized in that video, that it was the one that was, of all my videos, getting closest to kind of a tinfoily thing. What I would say, looking at it now, is that this is definitely noticeable, that the Targaryen family line, if you could exclude who some of the Targaryens married, because the bloodline that we get coming down for the Targaryens, all of the Targaryens that we have come down through this Daemon and Rhaenyra line, which then comes down to a Aegon and Melissa Blackwood line. So actually, we've got quite a thin line coming through. And yes, when you look at that line, you see that they marry other Valyrians. You see that they marry an Arryn. You see that they marry a Dane, and they marry Martell. So what you're getting are these different, and then also Blackwood coming on later. So you get all of the different ethnicities and magics of Westeros are coming into this one line, which leads down to Rhaegar, effectively. Also Danny. But then Rhaegar marries, so the last group that we have basically is the Starks, and Rhaegar gets together with Lyanna, and this seems to be the last thing which is going to produce the prince that was promised, the Song of Ice and Fire. That's the thing which sort of ends it all. In Bloodraven's mind, it would appear anyway. So the question is the extent to which that was intentional all the way through. Certainly you can look here at this bit of history, as we've been noting, the amount of accidents, the amount of deaths that we can't quite explain is huge. There's something going on. So what I will say, having given my little spiel earlier about trying as best as I can just to come up with working hypotheses rather than theories, we have to sit and recognize these as facts. That there were huge amounts of Targaryen deaths at this point, which did bring the family tree to a very clear line. And that very clear line did pick on the major ethnicities and magic groups within Westeros. What you do with that information then, I guess, is up to you. My default is to see, is there a hand behind this trying to guide that happening? Certainly, I think at the end of this process there is. Whether it happens earlier, that bit I'm less certain about. Let's go to Martin S saying, if Tywin never smiles, that is one thing he has in common with Stannis, even though the reasons and characters themselves are surely different. Yeah, they are different characters, but I think we are supposed to see similarities between Tywin and Stannis. I think we're supposed to see people as well as sort of opposite. Stannis is there just doing his duty. This is the thing he has to do. Tywin is very much more trying to, I'm going to make sure my family get power and I'm going to do the thing that needs to be done. But they are both the kind of person that people may not love, but they might respect and probably fear. Snowgal saying, I've been a patron for a year now, or nearly a year now, and this is the first time I've managed to make a deadline for submitting a question. Well, welcome. And it's not about Maekar exactly, but about Bloodraven. Again, we're talking about this supposed plan of winnowing down the Targaryen family tree to the one line that will produce the prince that was promised. If a Targaryen descendant is required to fight back the others, then it should follow that dragons are needed. Why else would Targaryen blood be so important? So even if his monomaniacal plan works, will he have produced the perfect Targaryen heir, but no dragon for him to ride? Is there any evidence that Bloodraven was trying to bring back the dragons as well? I mean, really interesting question. So there is again and again and again through this period and forwards, in fact, every time from after the Targaryens lost the dragons, this increasing focus on the return of dragons in the actions of the Targaryens and also in the prophecies and dreams that they seem to be having. So one thing that we noted, when you get that first series of Targaryen kings after the Dance of the Dragons, and they react to the loss of dragons in different ways. Aegon III, first of all, he doesn't like dragons. He doesn't want dragons back, gets rid of all of the dragon eggs, and then seems to have a change of heart and then wants the dragons to be hatched. Then you sort of move on and we get someone like Diron the First, who is there saying, right, okay, so there's no dragons. I am the dragon. I am I'm all the dragon you need. I'm going to go off there. Then you get Baelor, who's like, no, none dragons. We're not doing dragons. I mean, burning any books about dragons. Though even he seemed to be having this kind of like dragon egg obsession on the side. Then you get Aegon IV, who was there, who wanted to build kind of steampunk dragons, as far as we can tell, which succeeded only in falling over and burning down half the Kingswood. So you get this succession of different ways that people seem to be adapting to this idea of we've not got the dragons anymore. Then when we get onto this kind of time period, you start getting people who are having dreams about dragons. So Egg, in one of the Duncan Egg stories, might be the Swan Sword, he says, yeah, the dragons are coming back. Deeren dreamed about it. Aemon says that they will as well. He's been reading about it. We get the Daemon II Blackfire. He has dreams of dragons returning. Ariel obviously has dreams of dragons returning because he thinks the way to do that is by drinking wildfire. Aegon, when he's king, he tries to hatch them. He gets pyromancers across. He comes up with this plan to hatch dragon eggs. So it happens again and again and again. This focus on getting dragons. Now, where does that come from? Is that a thing from Bloodraven or not? I don't think on this occasion it actually makes much difference, because in terms of your question, is he just missing a trick here? That the dragons, that they need dragons when they're not going to have dragons? Well, he will have been aware that these dreams and prophecies are out there, that the dragons will return. So it's more a matter of how and when. Maybe he doesn't know exactly when, but certainly part of this the prophecy, the Azor Ahai prophecy, Prince that was promised prophecy, that Melisandre, we hear from Melisandre, is waking stone dragons, basically, which comes true in Dany with the stone eggs, petrified dragon eggs, and then they crack and then they give birth to dragons. But clearly, I think Bloodraven will have known about these prophecies, and perhaps he thinks his part of this process is just to get the prince that was promised right, and then when that happens, the prince that was promised is going to bring back the dragons. So I think that's where I would go with this. I don't think he sees that as his personal mission to be getting the dragons back. Maybe we'll find out later he was the person who was prompting Aegon V somehow magically to try and hatch some dragons. I don't know, but I think he saw the line of causality was you get the prince that was promised by doing these things, and then the prince of the promised will bring the dragons. Let's go to, again, I suppose linked to this, Catherine Fursith question saying, "Hi Robert, hope you and Dan enjoying summer. Thank you. Regarding Aegon's prophecy, do you think Maekar knew about it? Is there any way to tell? And what about Bloodraven? Did he know about the prophecy because someone on the Targaryen line had told him about it, or did his knowledge of the others and the possible role of the Targaryens in their defeat come solely from his own connection to weirwood magic?" Now, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I think that he can learn about things from books. He can learn about things perhaps he could have been told by other Targaryens before him. My instinct is probably not. Probably by this point, then that specific prophecy has kind of stopped being passed down generation to generation. Even if you think that it did make it past the Dance of the Dragons when lots of people died, if you think it got past Baelor, who was obviously not wanting to pass on that kind of information and was trying to burn all sorts of things, here we get so many chances for this to get lost. If this is just being passed down from one ruler to their heir, you get Aerys went through 4 heirs, and he died very swiftly after naming his 4th, so it's entirely possible it could have got lost there. Lots of these kings we get, Maekar will have gone through heirs and left and died without leaving a clear heir. So this could very easily have got lost at this point, but probably was lost even earlier. Bloodraven, I suspect, yes, he will have picked up stuff from his own sort of magical studies. I personally think that although he was a green seer from a young age, that he could walk into things and he had green dreams. I suspect he didn't get the whole picture from that side until he went north of the wall and actually hooked himself up to the Weirwood network. So he was focused in on this prince that was promised prophecy, which we don't know all of the details, but it seems to be different to that original prophecy. So I am slowly coming around to this conceptualization of this isn't just a matter of a prophecy that the Targaryens have, which is passed down all the way. It is a slowly, gradually revealed prophecy. It starts with the you need to get out from Valyria. Then it comes to the you need to invade Westeros. Then it's you need to be holding Westeros. The Targaryens, it needs to be united. The Targaryens need to be ruling. Then it comes to the you need to hatch the dragons back again. Then it also comes to and we need to make sure we get this prince that was promised. This exact person is going to be doing that. Then when we get up to Dany, it's the and now you've got your dragons. This is what you have to do with your dragons. So it's this really long, slow, evolving kind of revelation of prophecy to House Targaryen. So Bloodraven doesn't need to have known all of the details of all of the other bits. What he needs to know about is what his part is, which is mainly focused in on the prince that was promised. Let's go to a question from Jewel Elson saying, shout out to IDG, our favourite content Maekar the first. Very good. Do you think Tansel the puppeteer will show up again in future stories? So yeah, actually this is a good so with Maekar, I think I've come to the end now of my questions from my patrons about Maekar specifically, but please do drop any other questions into the chat. Now is a very good time to do that. Jewel Elson's saying, do you think Tansel the puppeteer will show up again in future stories? And for old time's sake, please say Higa Herger and Googly Woogly. Very happy to on both of those. Will Tansel the puppeteer show up again? Yeah, probably. For those who missed this, then we get she's the person that Arian or Dunk rushes to the rescue of when Arian starts being really kind of seedy and nasty towards her. Then she disappears. Understandably, everything's going wrong and bad. She just gets out of there. And through the next couple of books, then we do get this kind of Dunk going, wonder where she went. Maybe we'll try Dawn. So he clearly still has this thing about her. Will she turn up? I think probably we'll see her again. I think that's just one of those nice things. And it may well be this is a kind of a growing moment for him when maybe she's found someone by that point. Maybe they moved on. This was literally somebody that he spoke to like 3 or 4 times. He seemed to like her, but he was a teenager at the time. So it may well be that this is actually quite a growing moment for him when he does meet her. Martin S. saying, which was the most destructive Targaryen succession war for the Iron Throne in Westeros's history? The most destructive? Well, it's probably the Dance of the Dragons, you'd have to say. We don't have... certainly the later Blackfire Rebellions are not in the picture at all. The first Blackfire Rebellion did split the nation in 2 in terms of its support, so you could argue that was destructive, but they didn't have dragons at this point, and there seems to have been one single decisive battle. There may have been others. We don't read about them, but there seems to be one single decisive battle, and that seems to have been largely it. Depends really what you count as being a sort of civil war for succession crisis. Certainly the wars around when Aenys and Maegor were sort of fighting, they got quite brutal. But in terms of just lots of people dying, then the Dance of the Dragons brought the entire continent to its knees. When you read Fire and Blood, you just think this is horrific. The War of the Five Kings is actually pretty bad as well. Andrew K saying an aluminium would be appreciated as well. Well, always happy to say aluminium. Right, question from Catherine Furseth, or a thought. How about a Bloodraven live stream? Fits with where we are on the timeline. I know Maura Lee, you were also asking about that one, so I haven't forgotten your questions. So I will answer your questions. I will do a Bloodraven live stream, and also I think a Maester Aemon live stream. As two characters, what I've tried to do is keep this to people who, not just the named characters who were the kings and queens, but also some people who were kings and queens in all but name, or could have been kings or queens. And Maester Aemon definitely could have been a king. If he had said that he wanted it, he almost certainly would have been king. So, yeah, I will do one on Maester Aemon. I will do one on Bloodraven. Maura Lee, I will answer your questions about Bloodraven and Maester Aemon. I think you had questions to both of them in those live streams. Question from, then I'll catch up on the chat. Maura Lee saying, how do you think the writer's strike will affect us ever getting the Winds of Winter? I know you can't predict when we'll get the book, but curious on your thoughts where George is regarding the last two books of the Song of Ice and Fire book series. So yeah, I will quickly, I thought about doing this last week. I don't think the question came up. Just as a sort of an overview on the writer's strike and also the actor's strike, where we're at on all of these TV shows and things. Firstly, for those who don't know, this is two American unions, the Writers' Union in America and the Actors' Union in America, have gone on strike. I'm not going to get into the politics of it. I think there's quite a lot to be said in support of the views that they are putting across. I would encourage you to go and investigate that yourself. However, in terms of the impact on the kinds of things that we care about on this channel, just quickly running down in Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, the Rings of Power Season 2, the writer's strike kicked in 19 days before their finished production on Season 2. They carried on anyway and finished that up. That is a wrap. So Season 2 will happen as it would presumably otherwise do. Still expecting that partway through next year. In terms of things in the Game of Thrones world, anything happening on Dunk and Egg, the spin-off has shut down. Anything happening with any of the other spin-offs which haven't been greenlit has been shut down. House of the Dragon filming is still going ahead for Season 2. And this is one of those things where I emphasize American unions, because the British unions are not on strike. Now, as far as I understand it, the British Actors Union Equity does support the American strike, but legally they can't stop. Maybe they will ballot their members at some point, who knows. But as it stands, the script was finished well beforehand for House of the Dragon Season 2. That everyone will seem to be happy with that, and the actors are carrying on acting. So we're about halfway through production on that at the moment. And so that's still on track to be, again, partway through next year, I imagine. There is, or has been just recently, George R. R. Martin gave a sort of an update on, and I think Andrew K, you mentioned this actually in the chat a little bit earlier, one of the spin-off, probably the spin-off, I don't even know if spin-off is the right word, but the spin-off that I'm most excited by is the stage play on the turning at Harrenhal. Now, George R. R. Martin announced this some time ago. Apparently, they've been working on it for years now. As I understand, this is a stage play, so it's not like a musical. This is like a proper play. That is not covered by the writer's strike. So George R. R. Martin is not doing anything on any of the TV shows at the moment, which theoretically gives him more room to do other things. He says he had a really productive meeting about that just a week or so ago, and he seemed quite excited by it. It has a name, or at least a draft name, which is The Iron Throne. And he seemed to be saying, "Oh, maybe we'll even get it out in time for. Oh no, better not tempt fate." So he's already thinking about when it might be ready. So, and he said, intriguingly, the West End, which I don't know. I mean, he's a clever guy, but previously he talked about this debuting in Broadway. But now, which is in New York, for those who do not know, now he said maybe it'll be ready for the West End, which is in London. So maybe he's now thinking, well, the actors are not on strike in London. Maybe we can do it over there. I don't know. That's pure speculation. But I'm excited about this if it goes ahead. He certainly seems very happy to be working on this during the writer's strike. So hopefully we might see that at some point. Maura Lee, you're asking about the Winds of Winter. He gave another update-ish on the Winds of Winter. The last update we've had in terms of how far through we are was from late last year, and he said he was about 75% of the way through. He'd done 1,100-1,200 pages, so yeah, he's got another 500-600 pages to go, or 400-500, whatever, and that... he says he is working on it. He's working on it most days. He is making progress, not as much progress as he would like, not as much progress as we would probably like, but he is still making progress. So that's the update we have. I mean, I've given up on guessing when we're going to get this. It doesn't seem to be imminent, but similarly, he seems to be most of the way through it, and I think that's probably where we can leave that. In terms of the other TV shows, just for those who are interested, The Witcher Season 3 Part 2 came out literally just today, I think, actually, maybe, or yesterday. I'm going to sit down and watch that tomorrow. They have also recorded a spin-off from that about the rats. If you've read the book, you know who the rats are. They're not a particularly sympathetic crowd, but we'll see what they do with that. That was slated to be a mini-series of 6 to 8 episodes, but they finished shooting that in just a couple of months, which certainly implies that this isn't a 6 to 8 episode mini-series. What that is, we still do not know. The Witcher Season 4 they have written, apparently, but they're not expecting to start production now until next year, so they're probably waiting for the actors strike to finish. So that's where we're at with the TV shows that are sort of in the works. And as I say, if you want to know about the issues, and they are significant issues to do with AI rights and things like that, then please do go and check that out. Onion saying House of the Dragon potentially may have worse writing due to rewriting not being available. I hope the strike ends soon so they can continue to alter the script just in case. Yeah, I mean, this is the risk that is there, is that they often, when they're filming things, then they do rewrites because something just doesn't work, or they change their mind on something. So it's certainly not optimal not having the writers there on set and being able to change things as they go along. George R. Martin did seem very happy with the season 2 scripts when they were signed off. So I guess we shall see. I suspected at the beginning when the writer's strike was announced, and then they said, well, they're going to go ahead with filming anyway. I suspect that they thought this is a long shoot, 10-month shoot. The writer's strike may well have finished by the time they get to the end of the shoot, in which case they can then sort of quickly write a few things and tag on a last few extra bits of reshoots at the end, which is possible. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. Let's go with Reflective Rambling saying, proper play, not a musical. You just want to deny me my epic Elia in a monologue ballad or comparative duet with Leanna. Yeah, I don't know. I've not heard definitively on this one. And George R. Martin does like songs. And we definitely do have at least one song being played in this. So, I mean, I probably shouldn't put it like, and I shouldn't be disdainful of musicals. But there's definitely Rhaegar played his harp and sang at the feast at the Tony at Harrenhal. So, and the music brought Leanna to tears. So definitely there should be some music in this. I think what I was trying to say, this isn't, I don't believe that this is a musical driven thing. So I believe it is more, and proper plays the wrong way, but you know what I mean by it. Andrew K saying, excited to hear anything about the stage play after near years of silence on it, though I suspect George R. R. Martin will make sure The Winds of Winter comes out first to provide certain reveals via the text. Yeah, I mean, that's always been my assumption, is that he will want The Winds of Winter to come out first. He's not going to keep it on hold until after whenever he thinks he's going to do A Dream of Spring. But the Tony at Harrenhal should, if you've not watched my many videos on the subject, you may not understand everything that is going on there. George R. Martin has said, he's gone on record, he said lots of things happened at the Tony at Harrenhal. So many things I could have written an entire book about it, and a George R. R. Martin book length at that. So there's huge amounts of things go on there, and crucially, it will show us a lot about the role of Howland Reed. It will show us a lot about what actually happened, who was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, what actually happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. It will give us huge amounts of hints about the role of the Weirwood network as a whole, I suspect, and also Ned's background. So we're going to get a lot of stuff going on here, subplots with Jaime Lannister and Tywin and Aerys. What was Rhaegar's big plan? There's lots going on here. I suspect he will give us some of that in The Winds of Winter, but if maybe this is a vehicle which he is going to release a bit more information, something that he's got a bit more control of, creative control of, say, than lots and lots of TV shows. If it is just 1, 2, 3 hour stage play, then he can be a lot more controlling of that. Agree Weirwood saying it's interesting that he said that he killed off someone he needed, which is why The Winds of Winter was delayed so much. Yeah, I mean, this is something. I mean, I think this is quite an old quote, actually, which got resurfaced recently when he was talking to another writer and said, yeah, have you ever killed off a character and then realized that you needed that character in a later book? Kind of hinting that is a thing that's happened in The Winds of Winter. I don't think that is the main reason why. Actually, I'm doing a video at the moment, which I kind of hesitated to do because it sounds a bit clickbaity, which is why is The Winds of Winter taking so long? Expect this at some point in the next week or two. What I've wanted to do for a while is just sort of set out as objectively as we can, without just sort of saying, oh, he's just doing other things, he doesn't care about it anymore. Trying to get past that to understand the writing process and what is it that might be actually slowing him down, because it has been a long time now, and I think we can't pretend, even those of us who are supportive of him and say that we're happy for him to produce it when he can, we have to accept the fact that this has been a long time. So I wanted to try and, in as objective a way, try to unpick what is potentially going on there. Carl Carsnock saying, I assume Robert can sing as well as Anthony Stewart Head. I mean, I no, but that's very kind of you to think that. And this is reference to Once More with Feeling from Buffy, one of the top episodes of TV ever. It is an excellent episode, that one. Ranabin Mitra saying, what will you do if you hear Rhaegar sing Jenny's song in the play? That will be amazing. Let's have I'm just flicking through the chat. Carl Carsnock saying there's a great picture of George R. R. Martin and Neil Gaiman at the picket lines. They're the obligatory two old guys in the crowd. Noah J. Loving House of the Dragon but standing with the workers and their strike. Reflective Rambling saying that Rawrist has just released a video on what George R. R. Martin has said about the writers' strike. Yes, so basically he's very clearly come out in support, particularly of the writers, because he is a writer, and he says that as far as he's concerned, his contract with HBO was suspended the moment that all of this happened. He is not working on anything. Pardon me. TV related, this is, which, as I say, I think offers us some hope that this means that he's doing non-TV related writing. So yeah, that's but he's very much supportive of it. Ranabir Mitra suggesting a 2-part live stream for Bloodraven. Well, let's see how one part goes. Okay, I think that's probably bringing me to the end of the comments there. Just in terms of what's happening over the next few weeks for these live streams, so you know what's happening next week. I'm taking the second of my scheduled. Some of this is some proper summer holiday. I'm going to take some time off for a week. Then I should be back for a week. Then the week after that, I'm aiming to do something a little bit different, maybe a bit more fun, a little bit more relaxed. We'll probably do that as a summer charity live stream. I do try to do at least a couple of charity live streams per year. Then I want to come back and really dig into the last part of this bit of Targaryen history. So we've got a Bloodraven one to deal with. We've got Aemon to deal with, and then we've got Aegon the Fifth. By the time we get there, we're almost up to the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, because we're then getting into Jaehaerys and then Aerys II. So we've actually not got that far to go on this. So I'm going to start thinking about, in terms of the A Song of Ice and Fire live streams, where we might go after this. I will carry on the series looking through the Fellowship in the Lord of the Rings, keeping up here on this channel, IDG Live, with the short form content. You can also find me over on TikTok doing that if you're a TikTok person. And a few extra videos coming out, obviously, on the main channel. One of them about why are we waiting so long for the Winds of Winter, but also one, I think I've got one about the Palantiri coming out, the seeing balls in Lord of the Rings. Anyway, that's enough for this time. I won't be here next week. I will be back in 2 weeks' time here on this channel. The content will keep on coming while I'm not here, though, so do not worry about that. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.